And I am privileged to be in the Messenger Studios with the most amazing engineer and mixer in the back. And I've got great guests with me today, Miss Nancy Tate, who is our state representative. It's an amazing, it's going well. How are you today? Thank you for coming on the show and saying hello.
Great. Thank you very much, Pastor Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I know earlier with Steve in the studio, you and myself, I made the comment that it's very rare when the three busiest people or three of the most busiest people that I have in my life are all in the room at the same time. So to get schedules there, thanks for taking the time to come say hello. Hey, so tell us a little bit. All right, so we got so much going on these days. We've got our own government here in Kentucky. We've got legislation that's being passed as of yesterday. We've got the presidential debate a couple weeks ago. We've got a second assassination. I mean, there's a lot going on, all while we're believers in Jesus Christ,
Amen.
right? So I know a lot of people are saying, hey, like, can politics be in the church? How far, are we voting on policy? Are we voting on charisma? There is so much going on. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about what's happening in our backyard here in Kentucky, things that you have been addressing, working on. Just tell us a little bit about what's going on these days and like why it's important.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so we do. You're right. We've got so much going on. It seems like that in some regards, Kentucky and our district, our region, the Lincoln Trail Area Development District, which we're part of.
Okay.
We have been asking for so long to have so many opportunities.
Right.
Now those opportunities are here. We've got 65% more economic development opportunities in our region than anywhere else.
Wow.
In Kentucky. And so that is because it's just the most natural place for those opportunities to be.
So tell me a little bit more like what that looks like. What does an opportunity look like for us, middle class or white collar or lower? Like, how does that translate into like, is it an opportunity for like us? Is it just for like the common Kentucky person?
Sure enough, yeah. So if you think about from an employment perspective, since the
Yes.
the 90s, we've been going away from manufacturing to service.
Okay.
And so most of the new jobs that we had or the employment opportunities
Right.
that we had were in the service industry. Now we're moving more away from that back into the manufacturing industry, which to me is very exciting. While I've made most of my career in the service industry, we, as you know, we have to produce something.
Absolutely.
We have to
Yeah.
be producers in order for us to be able to compete economically in the nation and in the world. And so we've got those production jobs that are here
Right.
and that are starting to ramp up and will continue to ramp up.
That's incredible. I know that jobs is really important, especially with like inflation that's through the roof. I know that we continue to print money with things that are not backed up, which the federal government actually is the one that buys the bonds, and then they turn around and they print the money. And then at the end of the day, we say like, well, how much can we print before it's just through the roof and people can't afford anything? These jobs, tell me a little bit of like, what is fair and competitive pricing like for wages these days? Like how,
Sure.
when we're producing all these jobs, which is phenomenal. I think you guys are absolutely crushing it
we're
because
crushing it.
people have got to work.
Absolutely.
They've got to work. What are you seeing out there when it comes to like fair wages as opposed to like what maybe the nation is demanding? And I know that different regions are priced differently. So,
Sure.
we go to the West Coast, we go to California, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, that was the first time we heard like $18 to $20 for fast food. What is competitive these days with all the jobs being produced? Just to give us like a realistic idea.
Sure, and the reason why I'm smiling is because there's a huge gap
Right.
between those positions. Because one of the things that's really interesting and a lot of people don't know is that our number one cash crop in Kentucky is aerospace.
Wow.
Yeah, aircraft engineering.
Okay.
Aircraft, anything that is revolving around aircraft, and of course that's exciting for me because that's the sector that I came from. Even though
Right,
I worked
okay.
for UPS and it was transportation, I worked for the airline most of the time. So, UPS and these other organizations, you can think of like Amazon, you can think of DHL, you can think of all the those transportation companies and those and that have gotten into aircraft, into being airlines. Those jobs are starting out in over $100,000.
That's incredible.
It's incredible, absolutely incredible. So when you take those positions, which there's a lot of opportunity for that. I think in the within the next 10 years, there's an estimation that there's going to be like 500,000 jobs in that sector.
in here in our state?
In our region, within our
Wow.
within Kentucky and within our neighboring states.
And business is that good to produce, or how do we? So for just maybe like somebody who's just listening, who's just like, that's incredible. How are jobs produced? Like, go just kind of like in layman's terms a little bit more. Like, how is a job produced? Like, is airlines, is that going well?
It's going very, very well.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can't just say from a UPS perspective. Let's use a FedEx perspective.
Sure.
Let's use Amazon. Let's use DHL and all those transportation companies that traditionally don't move people. We move products.
Exactly.
So these corporations, and I'll use UPS, we've changed the dynamics of transportation across the world.
Wow.
We've made it to where companies, organizations, individuals like you and I can actually move our goods and services across the world in 24 hours, 48 hours.
That's incredible.
So that means also the people on different continents can move their products to us as well.
So bottom line, you're out there producing jobs.
We're out there
That's what you're working for right now.
That's exactly right. I am working really hard at producing jobs. That's exactly right. And that's at that level. We're talking about the $100,000 level, or we're also talking about the individual who needs to just get into the marketplace and they're making the $15 to $25 an hour.
Is that how hard is it to tap into like a job like this? Like if I'm looking on Indeed.com or even like on Facebook, what kind of education is required to begin to submit the process?
Yeah. So in most cases, there's either like a certification or a technical or a degree that's required.
Cool.
But the interesting thing is that not only do we have the opportunity at the colleges and universities, but we also have ECTC, which we have our career center here in Brandenburg,
which is incredible.
I highly applaud the people that were involved in making that happen.
That's amazing.
Absolutely. And then, from an ECTC perspective, it is obviously college and technical. What they've done is they've brought in 4-year universities and colleges that are working with ECTC on the ECTC campus.
That's amazing.
And so we know that not everybody needs to go into college, but if you're not going into college, then in most cases you need that technical degree.
Right.
And so, from a legislative perspective, what we've done is that working with ECTC, most of the degrees and certifications that you get from ECTC and those other technical colleges, they'll be debt free if you go through their programs.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's not. It's some people are like, oh, well, Nancy, that's exactly the people that are getting college loans.
Yeah.
They're getting those forgiven. I said, well, it's not exactly.
It's a little different. This is a little different.
Yeah, because the reason why is whenever you sign on and say that I'm going to pay that loan back, you've actually signed a legal document.
Correct.
That you're going to pay that back. When you walk into a program that you're going to get a technical certification, you understand that's another legal agreement that you're going to get that certification or technical degree, or in some cases a diploma, it being actually something that as an industry and as a state that we need that.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. When they're going through that education, they're going to go back into our own state and they're going to produce. That's just that's consumer right there. It's just that this is the need. This is who's going to be doing it, as opposed to somebody who went to school. And like I don't want to talk about any specific major, but there has been students for the decades that are going and they're racking up all these bills and these loans and they're not utilizing what they've been doing. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, I'm going to vote for president, or I'm going to be this of the state, and I want to forgive all of your loans and all those promises that you made. Very, 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 very different. And even as somebody, so as I went to school, and we paid off college loans, and we paid off my wife's college loans and stuff like that. When I wasn't upset when the idea of what you're talking about came up, because I was like, oh, I don't think that like you said, we went into an agreement. We said we're going to go into ministry, and that wasn't offered for ministry, and that didn't matter. So that's incredible. So what is the next mile marker or benchmark that you're going towards in this area? What's the next win to get all these things approved, or like what does it look like in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so in some cases, it's actually to set up the opportunity and then for government to get out of the way.
Well, that's a hard, yeah.
That's
Wow.
absolutely, because, there's lots of things. I mean, we were talking, I happened to be in the Agriculture Committee meeting this morning.
Right.
And we were talking about how there are so many regulations, regardless of what sector of the business that you're in, there are so many regulations that can prevent you from being successful. And so it's really important for us as legislators, whether we're at the state or the federal level, to ensure that we're not passing regulations that prevent and cripple
Right.
whatever sector that is. And coincidentally, since I was in the Ag Committee, we were talking about the carbon footprint. And
Yes.
we were talking about how important it was for maybe farmers to sign on to the carbon footprint and to sell their carbon footprint to somebody in New York or somewhere that they don't even know. And then part of the agreement might be for them to demonstrate that they haven't sold any of their lumber. And it's just like, what in the world are we talking about?
That sounds.
But it's just this. It's just it just seems like it's just another pie in the sky, or just this other concept that would be to encourage this now farmers
Right.
not to produce cattle, or not to produce
Right.
not to produce a food source.
Hmm.
So instead of taking away our coal
Right.
and some of our other cash crops, they're looking at trying to eliminate carbon footprint, which is from animals. And I'm just like, I'm not even sure.
I've heard
what
of
in
that.
the world we're talking about. Yeah. So there's just these amazingly interesting concepts. I feel like I'm being somebody's trying to sell me the new snake oil.
I was going to say, because I've read about the carbon footprint supposedly by animals.
Right.
That was like a big thing for maybe like a couple of weeks. It did not seem like there was any science to support that on any level.
Right.
I think the context that I was reading it in was an attempt to relate that to climate.
The climate control.
Climate control and the icebergs melting and things like that. And I know at least every decade for like the last 40 to 50 years, some state is going to be flooded in the next 20 to 30 years, and everybody's going to be gone, and none of that is true at all. So here's an interesting question on the faith part. When you're in these meetings, right, as a believer, we know the truth biblically, that the Lord has said in Genesis that he's never going to flood it. He's never going to flood the world again. So I'm not concerned about any icebergs melting and flooding my home. I'm not saying that like tsunamis and things like that don't happen, but how hard is it to get things, how challenging can it be when you know that there are promises in the Bible that God's going to do, but yet government sits there and stresses because they don't know the Lord. They stress over policies that are never going to happen.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that's really a very deep question.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes I'm like one of the most positive people that you'll ever meet. But at the same time, I mean, I was on a talk show earlier this week and I heard myself use, that's terrifying. That concept to me is terrifying. And I thought, wow, Nancy, that's really interesting that you're using that term. I don't recall ever using that term. And so I think that it's very, very, very important for us to not totally stress ourselves out over things that probably won't happen.
Exactly.
Or even if they do, we always know that there's God has a plan. God has promised us that He will not forsake us.
Right.
He will not forget us. He will not flood the world again.
Right.
There's some things, and coincidentally, I have to bring this up. I was just looked up and I was like, there was a rainbow. I was like, thank you so much.
Exactly.
I really needed that rainbow today.
Yeah.
And it was, and I know it wasn't for me. I know it was for everybody, but I just happened to look up and see that. And I think that's so important for us to continue to be grounded in our faith.
Yes.
And not let all the news media and all of our concerns about the upcoming elections, all the things that could potentially happen and maybe will happen to us, but not to forget that, we're a child of God. Absolutely.
I was listening to Tucker on Fox a couple of weeks ago, and it was really interesting. He was almost surprised by, they ran some stats, some data, and they they ran a survey on who is nervous about the future and who's not nervous. And then when they took that survey and they asked, like, do you have a faith behind, like, what leads you to not or to being nervous? And majority of those that are not nervous were people who have a faith in Jesus Christ. And he goes, you know what's really wild? He goes, about this Bible thing. And I don't know if Tucker is a believer or not. I mean, how can we possibly know unless he said something? But you could almost tell, like, he was surprised. He's just like, he goes, I'm surprised that it's the Christians who are not nervous. He goes, the Bible apparently has given them enough peace. And I was just like, you know what? It's little things like that, you know? And so we need really good people in government. We have to have good people in government. Absolutely. And believers, everybody for that matter, but believers must get out and vote. And I hear that sometimes. I hear that in the church world. Well, the Lord sits on the throne. That he does. Yes. He rules. He sovereignly. Yeah, absolutely. But all throughout the Bible, from the beginning of the Old Testament all the way to Revelation, we are encouraged when it comes to government. Government's been around he instituted the concept. Correct. Right? Because there is a kingdom building and there is a government by the Lord, and he talks about what government should look like. We actually see that in the Old Testament, what government was set up to look like, and and to submit to the authorities, but that was assuming that the government is under a godly rule. So when it comes to your faith and being in there and stuff like that, and I know I just kind of asked this a little bit, are there other believers? Like, what does it look like? An average day at Frankfurt, are believers around? Talk to me just a little bit about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a prayer caucus.
Amazing.
And so,
awesome.
Yeah, and so on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we meet before we go into session.
Very good.
And so it's basically, there's some people that you're going to see there every single time, and then there's some people that just come in whenever they can. But
Absolutely.
For the most part, you're going to see the consistency. There's probably 20 to 30 legislators.
That's amazing.
That show up on a weekly basis.
Amen.
And that's just on Tuesday and Thursday, and that's just in the House.
Wow.
The Senate, I'm sure, has their own, but we do that. We pray for ourselves. We pray for the strength. We pray for our leadership. We pray for the world. So we all, it's very important for me to make sure that I go into that, not only because I want to make sure that from a morality perspective,
right.
I keep myself grounded.
Sure.
Most frequently, you hear me say that that I'm addressing it from an ethical perspective.
Absolutely.
And because everybody, regardless of whether you're a believer or not, most of us understand ethics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's how you'll hear me most frequently use that.
Right.
But I think that one of the most, the saddest thing that I've seen in my lifetime is where hope has been destroyed. And you can see where most of they talk about the suicide rate with the young people.
Right.
And the reason why, from my perspective, is because they don't have hope.
I completely agree.
And so it's so important for us to
Right.
continue to instill hope in ourselves and in our community.
Absolutely. And I would just piggyback off that hope and truth, according to the Bible, it translates into Jesus, right? And so I know that a lot of young people are looking for that hope and looking for truth, and they're not finding it in the world. Obviously, that's what the Bible says. You're not going to find it in the world.
Find it in the world.
And so if it's not on Jesus, then they're going to be disappointed. That's all that awaits them.
That's right.
And so you were talking about ethics and things like that, and I know that people's values are very different if they believe the Bible or if they don't believe the Bible. I was kind of shifting gears just a little bit here when it comes to like policies, ethics, and charisma. I know that's what, after watching the presidential debate a couple weeks ago, right? I know that's what this is really going to come down to. Like, is it going to be charisma? Which we're not really sure what the policy is. I think one of the best things that I have heard, regardless what I'm voting for or voting for who, people do not know who Harris is.
That's correct.
They don't know who she is. They don't know what she stands for. She's been appointed. She has not won, to be where she's at today. When she was running, nobody voted for her. That's very concerning that we're now.
Yeah, I think 4%. She got 4% of the vote, or
That's-
less than 4% of the vote
When
she was in the primary.
If 96% of any local church that I ever pastored did not vote for me to be there, I would do that church a service.
That's right.
And say, listen, I'm clearly
That's right.
not the person that the Lord wants me or, to be shepherding right now. Like, I'm going to pray where I'm supposed to be, and you're going to pray for whoever is supposed to be here, right? And that's always a hot mess to position yourself into a place where you're not supposed to be,
Right.
just for the sake of whoever else may gain, right? And that almost brings me back to another Bible verse and everything like that. What are your thoughts about, not your thoughts, but charisma versus policy? What did you take away from that presidential debate that concerns you the most? And what should we be looking for? Like, why should we be looking for in November? So what concerned you the most after watching that?
Yeah, so whenever I watch the debate, and even when I'm watching the interviews,
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the reasons why the people that were impressed by Vice President Harris were impressed was because I think she exceeded people's expectations.
I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Yeah, because in lots of cases, she cannot string more than 2 sentences together, and she absolutely strung those together.
She sure did.
But every time you hear a debate, or she's had 7 interviews, I think, up to this point, her responses are the same.
Yeah, completely the same.
So, and I haven't heard anybody ask her a really hardball question and insist that she responds to that question.
Right.
So I think that anybody could memorize a response and continue to repeat that.
Right.
I mean, whether you're even, anybody can do that.
Anybody can do that.
That's
Anybody can
right.
do that.
That's exactly right. And it's almost like it's an act. And so what I am very concerned about is that, again, it goes back to what are her policies, what are her principles, and then are we truly voting for her?
Right.
Are we voting against President Trump? And again,
Right.
is it because we don't like his tweets or we
Right.
don't like his, how his name calling? Again, I came from the transportation sector.
Right.
And I certainly don't agree with, any kind of harsh language or any kind of
course, yeah.
derogatory language. But at the same time, I've heard it all.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I want to see what policies
Mm-hmm.
and those that have been implemented. I would challenge anybody, what has Vice President Harris done?
Mm-hmm.
What has she done? What is the single thing that she has done that has impressed you enough for you to vote for her?
Nobody is going to give you an answer.
That answer. That's exactly right.
Because we've asked it. I've asked it. Tell me, oh yeah, I love Harris. That's awesome. The last 3.5 years, what are you up to these days? And they'd say, couldn't tell you a single thing that she's
Couldn't tell
done.
you a single thing.
Not a single thing.
Yeah.
That's wildly concerning. And you know what? If that was what was happening on the Republican side too, I'd be concerned.
Absolutely.
I'd say, no, nobody can have we all get one vote. And that's why it's so precious to actually cast it.
Right.
Right? Everybody gets it.
One vote.
One vote.
Regardless of how old you are,
Right.
young you are, rich you are, poor you are, what state, what condition, everybody gets one vote.
You get the vote.
One vote. And that's so important. Absolutely.
Um,
I think the other thing that concerns me too, and I'm just, because I hear a lot of people say, well, this is our best opportunity to have a woman president. I'm going to tell you, I am one of the strongest people in supportive of women. I love women. I love men. I love, just love people.
Right.
But she's not the woman. I'm just going to tell
Right.
you, she is not a Margaret Thatcher. She does not have the policies and the strength and the experience that we need to be the commander-in-chief
Absolutely.
of the strongest nation in the world.
Going with that, when you can't find out anything about somebody, my next move is I'm going to go directly to where they come from and their parents. And when I look at her dad, who is a renowned Marxist, right? Which, and if people don't know what a Marxist is, take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes, because there's been some nationwide movements based off the Marxism policies, fundamental concept of, and it's to disassemble. That's the word that they use, to disassemble the normal original American family.
Right.
Which was on the website of one of the biggest movements that we've seen in the last 100 years. And then disassembling just means to unwind what has been done. And the American family, or what this has been founded on, is a man and a woman with children and who are working and going to school. That is the American family, right?
That's right.
This movement wanted to disassemble that. And that kind of thinking is what her father has been doing, and that's not an opinion.
That's
like
right.
anybody
That's
that's
a
just
fact.
that's common knowledge that you can just go and just find out what he's been doing with his whole life. That's where she's coming from. So if I can't find out, if she's not unwilling to speak for herself, or if somebody is speaking for her to respond, and that's where she comes from, there are so many red flags. There are so many red flags with that, and that's what it concerns me. November's going to come.
That's right.
November's going to come. They're all going to play their best card. It's going to be what it is, and we're going to move on into December for the next 4 years. But anyways, so that's like nationwide. If we go to our own backyard, tell me a little bit. Okay, so Governor Beshear signed something yesterday, an executive, right? An executive
order.
So tell us why an executive order is so much more pressing than something that usually takes its due diligence and its time.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really sad about this is that, so whenever you hear this discussed on the radio or on the television, the response is that the way it's being communicated is that Governor Beshear passed legislation with this executive order.
Right.
As we know, there's 3 branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive, and the judiciary. So the executive branch does not pass legislation.
Right.
It's not an opportunity at all.
Okay.
But what he's done is that when you go through the legislative process, in the House, there's 100 members. In the Senate, there's 38 members.
Okay.
But each one of us represents a district.
Right.
We represent our people. So I represent 45,000 people.
That's a lot.
27.
That's a lot of people. That's a big responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility, and that is in Meade County and then primarily Radcliffe.
Okay.
So if you think about all the different dynamics of all the, all the 45,000 people just in my district, we have one of the largest concentrations of veterans.
Right.
We've got young, old. We've got schools. We've got all the teachers. We've got the transportation. We've got the people that are new core. We've got you just think about it and how diverse it is over in Radcliffe as well.
Right.
So, but what he's done is he's actually taken the voice, once again, the single vote, the voice of every individual that has been given to me, that has been given to their legislator.
Right.
He has basically said, I know better than all of you all.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I'm going
to think that.
I'm going to, well, yeah, absolutely.
To do it is,
well,
I mean, but to think though.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And to think that, so he completely took away the single voice from each individual.
Wow.
And people can say, yeah, but he was elected to be our governor. Again, it's not the role of the governor to pass legislation.
Right.
It's the role of the legislative branch.
Right.
And so, and with this legislation, it's kind of confusing because on the surface, it sounds like it's a good thing.
Right.
Because what he did was he banned conversion therapy. He banned conversion therapy.
Right.
So that sounds like, oh, good.
It makes it sound like that there was something wrong going on. Okay,
That's exactly right. It makes it sound like there was something wrong that was going on.
So for the viewer that might be hearing about this for the very first time, right? So yesterday he signed an executive order to ban conversion therapy. Tell us what conversion therapy is, as summarizing.
Yeah. So if you're an individual that believes for whatever reason that you were born into the wrong sex.
Right.
And that you want to convert to another sex. And if you go to a counselor to discuss that, then that counselor will be held accountable for even having that conversation with you. They could potentially lose their license for even having the conversation with you, whether they agree with you or whether they disagree with you. They could potentially lose their livelihood for having that conversation with you. And then not only does that remove the role and responsibility of the counselor to make sure that they're acting in your best interest, that also took away the rights of the parents. To the voice of the parents to seek counseling for their child.
Which is what's happening in Minnesota.
It's exactly what's
Which is happening in Minnesota, where a boy or girl can go and the doctors, I know, I'll summarize this because there's a lot to it. And actually, Megyn Kelly nailed this, right? She just explained what's happening in Minnesota, where a boy or girl of a significant young age can go to a school or
at any age
to anyone.
There's no limitation in Minnesota.
Right. And if anybody obstructs or challenges what this little boy and this little girl want, right, if they want to change their sex or begin to play or pretend, that anyone who gets in the way, including the parents, could be removed. Right, the child would be removed from the custody of the parents, and doctors would be able to still perform.
Yep.
Is this? It might be a giant leap, but it's got to start somewhere, right?
That's right.
It's things like this that says, okay, we're not going to go that extreme in the minute because the Minnesota district is just. I would never want to say that the Minnesota district is nuts, but they're very far from some logical thinking, right? And we've seen the government that's come out of that. It's places and executive orders like this from a man who will also claim Christian values.
That's exactly right.
I've seen his.
He says he's a deacon in his church. I'm sure he's a deacon in his church.
Well, there's a lot of places that call themselves churches that is the furthest thing from what church out of Acts 3 Acts 2 or 3 should be looking like, right? And we know what the first sermon looked like. We know how many people got saved that day. We know what the church looks like. So for anybody who says, hey, listen, I'm really okay with like the murdering of babies or the mutilation of children, and I'm a deacon, I'm a church, I'll say it. I have no problems letting people know that there is an authentic relationship with Jesus Christ, and there are those that think that they do, and they don't.
Yeah.
It is what it is, right? And I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. When you're saying, hey, I'm going to allow children to be mutilated, because you know how many of those kids are coming back these days, and they're just like, I wish somebody would have stepped in and been like, hey,
Absolutely.
I wanted to be Captain America one day. I wanted to do this. I wanted to be a girl. You know what? That's what moms and dads are for. Is to say, well, listen, buddy, I love you to death. And, I'd love to find out where you heard this and what's been influencing you and how much YouTube you've been, or, are you being parented by an iPad? There are 1,000 things that could be influencing a person to make it look like it's popular or this is what you want to do to a stinking 6-year-old.
That's right.
Like, give me a break.
Yeah. And in addition to, I totally agree with you. And I'm just really disheartened that the power was taken away from the parent.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was really interesting was that Governor Beshear said that one of the reasons why he did this was because the legislation didn't pass through the legislative branch. Well, if you go back and look at the individual who filed the legislation,
right.
She was a Democrat, Lisa Wilner, Lisa Wilner.
Yep.
Okay, so she's a Democrat. So whenever you have an 80 to 20 supermajority in the House, obviously the language that she introduced was not popular
right.
in the House.
Sure, yep.
So because of the 80% supermajority, we did not even take it up. There
Wow.
was no way in the world that we were
Right.
going to take it up.
Sure.
So therefore, Governor Beshear took it upon himself to override the interest of 80% of the legislative branch or the population here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
I view that as an abuse of power.
It's absolutely an abuse of power.
And people may say, well, but he has the right. It doesn't mean that he should.
Yeah.
I've grown that my whole life. Just because you can.
Yeah.
So all that says to me is poor leadership. Okay, I have the power. But if you use it incorrectly, even when you can do it, it's still wrong.
Right.
And it makes me really nervous that this is what step one looks like of something that would reflect what's happening in Minnesota, right?
That's right.
Believers need to speak up. They need to cast their vote because if it's happening there, it can absolutely happen here.
That's right.
And that's why I always tell people, always vote for the candidate that's going to support our military, because it's easy to be like, oh, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. Yeah, you have that luxury to say that from your house where there is not war on the streets and your kids are not having to run to a bomb shelter. It's easy, so, I don't want anything to do with the American flag. That flag covers you at night to where all you have to do is worry about some cameras and alarm system. It's the greatest, that's all that we need sometimes, right? But in reality, there's bombs flying everywhere, and kids, when you just look at Israel and Gaza and all the stuff that's going on over there, it could be us.
It can happen.
It could be us.
It can happen.
And you know what? And we have to be careful, because if we allow socialism to continue to creep into our nation, which is what is on the docket for November, is the beginning process. It's been on there for a while.
Sure.
The redistribution of everybody filing their taxes, and then the abuse of taxes, which the government is supposed to be delegating appropriately. And I'm not against the government overseeing our taxes and making sure that it goes to the right cause. They're just not going to the right causes. And so when that happened yesterday, I was very concerned with with Beshear, and kids are going to be family. It's a generational curse is what he's putting on to us in the future if we don't break that. So
I agree with you. Yeah. And I think we should really stop calling it socialism and just call it, like you said earlier, communism. And
yeah, it's absolutely communism. You're 100% right on that.
Let's quit calling it, it makes it sound nicer.
It does make it sound nicer, and it's not on any level. Nobody wins. They will try to convince us that we're all going to be equal, and that's not what it is. No, that's not what it is at all. So you really have a lot on your hands out there because you're not just going for the 45,000 people. You're representing us believers and everything like that. So, hey, listen, it was an absolute honor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. And, you're doing an incredible job. I could not thank you enough. Hey, listen, next week we are going to be having on J.R. Baris from the lead singer of Love and Death with Brian Welch, who will be here headlining with Korn. He's going to be in the studios. It's going to be Friday of next week. You will not want to miss that interview. And even the music going out is by his band Spoken as well. So we appreciate you. Thanks for checking in. Have an amazing day.